Hello everyone, my name is Rochelle Innocent and I'm the founder and CEO of Project Purpose. Welcome to our channel. Our community is focused on fostering the intellectual and character development in children. We do this through our parent-child workshops that are focused on 4 themes: autonomy, self-efficacy, compassion, and self-concept, in order to cultivate grit, perseverance, and resilience in each child. And we are so thrilled to be offering one of the first of its kind, virtual, continuous, and digital learning environments, enabling children and parents to connect from all around the world. At Project Purpose, our overarching mandate is to renew and rebuild family, community, and relationships. Our different social media platforms provide us with an opportunity to have discussions on all topics that relate to family, community, and relationships, with ourselves as well as with others, with a primary focus on mental health and education. More precisely, the ways that the institutions of mental health and education play a role and have played a role in our societies at large. These discussions and debates provide us with an opportunity to think critically about what needs to change within these structures for us to live up to our bold slogan: support, protect, and empower each child through youth-focused development, better known as leadership in juvenescence. We recognize that in valuing our children's leadership potential, this also translates as recreating and co-creating environments, both socially and politically, that will enable our children to thrive. For those of you who are particularly keen on the topic, we also write thought pieces every other Sunday, and we actually have one scheduled to drop this upcoming Sunday, so definitely be sure to meander over to the website and check out our content. If you are looking for listening alternatives, well, we have options. We're available on 10 different podcast platforms, and we've provided you with the links in the description down below. As is the convention, be sure to subscribe, hit that post notification bell so that you are aware of every time we post. And of course, if you like these conversations and you want to keep them going, like, comment, and share this segment. Let's get into it. Hello everyone. Welcome back to another segment here on Project Purpose. For those of you who are new, we cover topics that relate to mental health, mental wellness, and education on a week-by-week basis. And this week our topic of discussion is mental wellness. Now, I'm really psyched about the topic of discussion for this week because we're going to be initiating a 2-part series. What I'm realizing are becoming some of my favorite on thinking patterns that we really need to be more mindful of in supporting ourselves towards mental wellness. So the reason why this is a 2-part series is because the first part will be the thinking patterns we really want to avoid and we really want to do away with. And the second part will be the thinking patterns that we really want to adopt and we want to coach and train ourselves to think in such a way where these become the normal thinking patterns, enabling us to really live lives feeling well. And the second part of our series is really an opportunity to adopt and take on and coach our minds to cultivate thinking patterns that normalize ways of being and ways of thinking that's really going to enable us to thrive in our environments. So I have a list of 5 thinking patterns that are fairly commonplace that we all typically engage in from time to time, but they're the kinds of thinking patterns where even if we feel like they're innocuous or even if they're fleeting, we really want to take the time to catch ourselves and to correct. And that's the way that we adjust our thinking patterns, is really to catch ourselves once we're like in the midst of like a thought that we know is really not beneficial to us or not beneficial to those around us, and then we correct that thought and then we move forward with the correction. So when we think about the thinking patterns that we want to adjust, it's just about being more mindful, it's about being more intentional, and it's about holding yourself accountable. And if 2022 is about anything, it's really about personal agency. It's about accountability. And let's start at the root of it all, which is really our thinking patterns. So without further ado, let's jump into my top 5 thinking patterns that really hinder our ability to thrive, to grow, and to flourish in the environments that we're in. Let's jump into it. So the first thinking pattern, and this should come as no surprise to any of you if you've watched any of my content, you know, like I'm really dead set against this, and this is comparison. And we are conditioned in a society of competition and comparison and performance. And the really skewed thing about it is we're all very different, right? And the more that we acknowledge our individuality, the more that we acknowledge the fact that all of us show up with different talents, different strengths, different abilities, the more we're inclined to recognize that you can't compare apples to oranges, and each of us is a different fruit. And that's how I like to see it. And I think looking at it that way and recognizing that we're all very, very different, and the way that we show up is going to be very, very different. And rather than focus on the things that we are not, it's better to just focus on the things that we are and not build comparisons, because it doesn't help you and it doesn't help anyone else. And when you compare, the moment that you start comparing yourself to someone else, it very rarely is from a positive place. Like most of the time when people engage in comparison type thinking, it's not from a place of self-love. It's not from a place of self-affirmation. It's typically from a place of insecurity. So the more you feed into comparison, the more you grow and build your insecurities into beasts and monsters they don't need to become. So I think the more that we correct ourselves when we're in the midst of comparing ourselves with others, the more that we catch ourselves and are like, wait, I'm an individual, right? Like even if I don't necessarily have, you know, what it is that I recognize in this other person, I have other traits that are equally valuable, that show up differently. And it's more beneficial for me to focus on the traits that I do have, focus on what it is that I do bring than what it is that I don't bring. Is going to just be much healthier of a mental cycle and of a thinking pattern to get into. So I think that, it's not any of our faults. We've all been conditioned to compare and to perform and to compete. But the ultimate form of competition is competing against yourself, being a better version of who you were the day before, competing against someone else, comparing yourself against someone else when there are so many variables that make you so different is just a game where no one wins. So the first of my list of thinking patterns we really want to just be more mindful of and catch ourselves in is comparison. And remember, there is no comparison. We're all individuals. We're all on a very individual journey. And the more that you embrace and start to value your individuality, the more you recognize that comparison is really just futile. It's just not a useful use of your time and mental energy. And so that brings us to my second tip. And my second tip follows from the first one, and that's envy. And I've mentioned envy in a few of my videos, like with varying contexts, but envy and jealousy are really very dangerous forms of thinking patterns. Like a lot of true crime cases stem from a place of envy. So we really need to catch ourselves, recognize just how toxic it is for us, as well as for the people around us, for us to feel envious. And the fact that like we're individuals, again, there's so much that you bring to the table that you discount when you spend so much energy envying traits in other people. The more you envy traits in other people, the less you acknowledge the traits, the gifts, the talents that you yourself bring to the table. And again, like envy is a dark spiral that has no positive effects. I have never met someone who was able to accomplish great things from a place of envy and feel accomplished, right? So even if you do make leaps and strides and what's driving you is envy, you're never going to feel like it's enough. Like you're always going to have like this void and this emptiness that you're trying to fill. So better to just do things from a place of self-worth, from a place of self love, from a place of recognizing that you're doing it because you believe in your own innate ability to do it, not because you're trying to prove yourself worthy in relation to other people. And I think that we talk about envy kind of, tongue in cheek, like we don't take it too seriously, but I take envy very seriously. Envy is not something that I want in my repertoire. It's not a thinking pattern that I have any threshold or tolerance for within myself or in anyone in my circle. And, I was raised in very competitive environments. Like, I'm a competitive person, but I don't compete from a place of envy. I compete from a place of ability, agility, from a place of excitement, from a place of wanting to see something be created based on like personal interest and investment of time and energy. Envy really just has no place there. I think it's just a very toxic, it's very unhealthy, and you're always selling yourself short. So anytime you find yourself in a cycle of envy, know that you're already selling yourself short. And why would you want to embark on any journey or interact with any person from that very dark place? So envy is definitely a thinking pattern that we need to be more mindful of. We need to be more intentional about, nixing it in the bud and not letting envy root itself and flourish within ourselves as a thinking pattern that I think that we really just need to be more mindful in correcting and removing from the ways of thinking and the ways of being that we carry into our collective environments and as we navigate the different scenarios and situations that we're in. So that was the second one. And so the third tip that I have, the third thinking pattern that I do believe we really need to be more intentional and mindful as by way of nixing is helplessness. And helplessness is a thinking pattern that I think that we've all been conditioned to feel helpless. We've been conditioned to believe that the choices that are like right in front of us are the only choices that we really can choose from. And there's always alternative choices. And whether or not we make those choices is up to us. Whether or not we're ready to make those kinds of sacrifices is up to us. But we are never helpless in our lives. And I think to feel helpless is to really discount and devalue your own personal agency. It discounts and it devalues your own sense of accountability and your own power of choice, right? And we talk a lot about like the power of why and the power of asking questions. We talk very little actually about the power of choice. And helplessness is really just, I think, an obvious signal that in our society we really don't put enough emphasis on choice, and we don't put enough emphasis on personal choice, on personal agency. And I think that's because there's a lot of choices that our society would like us to make that make society much easier to govern, but I don't know if that's the best for each of us individually. And I think what's best for each of us individually is to hone in and acknowledge the power of the choices that we have, to embrace that power of choice, to act on that power of choice, and to recognize no matter how dire the situation looks like, we always have choices. We can always choose how we move forward in every situation. And that's including choosing to do nothing, right? Inaction in and of itself is a choice. But why is it a choice that we would make if we know that there's another choice that is for a betterment, even if it's a difficult choice, even if it involves sacrifices, even if it involves a momentary struggle, whatever the case might be, just recognize that you're the author and owner of your choices, and let's do away with any helpless thoughts this year. So if ever it is the case that you feel a helpless thought, like where you feel completely discouraged and you feel like you really don't know what to do from there, like take a moment to meditate, be mindful in that sense and that state of being, and then try to think up different solutions, different next steps, even if they're little baby steps, even if they're just discovery steps. And I like to call discovery steps the steps where you're just getting a feel for your environment. You're getting a feel for what you could possibly do in the situation that you're in. And then you're giving yourself an opportunity for relay. So you're kind of putting feelers out there, getting a sense of how that might translate in action. And then you're moving forward with some additional information. So just know, like, even if your way of orienting and reorienting is going to be different, even if it's going to to be different from what you're used to. Always act from a place of power when it comes to choice, and never allow yourself to sink into the pit of helplessness. So my fourth tip today, my fourth, thinking pattern that we really need to be more mindful of and we really need to do away with is entitlement. And entitlement is one of those sneaky thinking patterns where we don't quite recognize it as entitlement. I don't think any of us actively thinks to ourselves that we feel entitled to have, specific answers from specific people, or we feel entitled to specific benefits, or we feel entitled to, so on and so forth. But I think when we approach situations from a place of entitlement, feeling like we ought to, or that we deserve to have something that really isn't ours to claim, I think that is very problematic. It creates lots of issues in our society. It creates a lot of social concerns as well. It creates a lot of, hiccups in the way that we socialize with one another when we approach socializing from a place of entitlement. And entitlement translates in so many different ways, like when you feel entitled to a relationship, when you feel entitled to a specific position, when you feel entitled to a specific status that you haven't worked for. I mean, all of these things really build into a bigger problem, a bigger societal issue when people don't recognize that there are certain accomplishments, certain successes, certain milestones, objectives in life that you get with hard work, right? You get because you put the hours in, you did the time, you made the sacrifice, and maybe that is glossed over. And a lot of the times when we hear success stories, there's a lot of struggle that is glossed over in those success stories, and people feel entitled to that success when they haven't put in equal work, put in equal time, put in equal sacrifice. So I think that it's important that if you want something, 100%, like set your sights on it and go for it, but never feel entitled to it. Like recognize that anything that you want, you need to put your energy towards accomplishing of your own merit. And any thought of, well, hey, I'm entitled to this because I'm X, Y, or Z, that's a problem. And carrying that mentality is so dangerous. It's so harmful to so many different people who are, more vulnerable and who don't have the bandwidth for that kind of entitled thinking. So I think that we really all just need to be more mindful of how it is that we feel entitled to other people's time, how we feel entitled to other people's energy, how we feel entitled to different things, places, experiences in life, and to really kibosh that way of thinking. Like anything you want, 100%, you should definitely put a goal together, like get yourself situated to accomplish it, but never feel like you deserve it just because you're you. I think that is a huge problem, a huge red flag, even if you're kind of observing that behavior in someone else. And it's something that we really need to just be more mindful of in the future. And that brings us to tip number 5, and that is establishing our worth based on external validation. And again, this is not our fault. We've all been socially conditioned to do this, but we do ourselves so much benefit by reversing that conditioning and recognizing that our value is intrinsic, our value is not circumstantial. And if you are surrounded by people who treat you as a commodity, who only recognize your value based on the status that you have, based on the things that you've acquired, based on the places that you've gone, then recognize that those are fairly superficial relationships. You want to build and cultivate relationships and create social networks with people who see your intrinsic worth and who value you no matter what circumstance or situation that you're in. You don't want to surround yourself with people who see the benefit in being surrounded by you because of how they view you. So they validate you externally based on the status that they're hoping to achieve or to acquire, as opposed to seeing your intrinsic worth as a human being. And I think the more that we do this pivot internally, where we start to value ourselves intrinsically, the less we value people who make us feel insecure. If we don't have specific, checklist items that make us high value individuals. And I think even the term high value individuals is really just very problematic. I think all of us are high value. All of us bring something different to the table. We bring something different to the conversation, to the discussion. And the less we emphasize value based on external reward and external accomplishments, and the more we recognize value as being an intrinsic human quality, the more we can start to really reestablish the value of being human. And I think being raised in very capitalistic sort of lenses, we devalue humanity quite a bit when we base value of each person based on like external aspects. And we want to get to a place, I think we have the technology, we have the automation, the robotization to really get to a place where we can free ourselves from, being the machines that really drive productivity and going back to being more human. But I think that there needs to be a mental shift as well. We need to start to think and see ourselves as more human than we actually see ourselves now. And we need to start to view ourselves through a humanistic lens as opposed to through a capitalistic lens, so that we can start to place more value on our humanity. In any case, those were my top 5 thinking patterns that we really just need to be more intentional of. We need to kibosh, we need to correct. If we find ourselves engaging in these thinking patterns throughout the day, it's just about, catching ourselves and like, no, like that's not helpful to me, that's not helpful to those around me. Let me self-correct and continue moving forward in a thinking pattern that is just healthier for everybody. And I think the more that we're intentional and the more that we're mindful and managing our own inner ways of thinking and of just, I guess mentally conversing with ourselves, I think the better we show up in our collective. Now, before you tune out, I would be remiss if I didn't let you know that we do have live events. So we plan on going live at least twice a month, every month for the foreseeable future on our Facebook page. So definitely be sure to check those out if you do see yourself participating and engaging with our community moving forward. These live events are paid events, but they're facilitated in such a way where we're cultivating the critical thinking, the life skills, and the soft skills required to derive more meaning out of life. And if it is the case that you want to participate on an ongoing basis, then definitely purchase our membership plans. They give you an opportunity to gain access to sweet discounts by giving you unlimited access to our live events, as well as access to our webinars and workshops over and above those live events. So definitely be sure to check that out. We have all of the topics available for the rest of the calendar year. We have the calendar year built up by theme, and then we have each individual topic and each date. You can RSVP up on the website. So RSVP as soon as you possibly can. Join our game changer community. Let's build solidarity. Let's support each other's growth and development. And yes, I think that's it for this part 1 of this series. I look forward to chatting with you soon.